morning, everyone. I know it's early, but let's take a short trip to China. Did you ever hear about the company Xing Technology? Anybody? It's a Chinese startup, a drone company. From the pictures, videos, and positions the company create movement data of people. Together with the official data from official institutions, they are able to create a perfect profile of who lives where, doing what. Sounds like George Orwell, 1984. I think it's definitely beyond that. Yes, it's definitely worse. Yes, of course, it's China. Different country, different rules. But I think it gives us a glimpse of what might be possible. Big data is a big issue. And not only for the wrong reason, I would like to emphasize that just as well. Because don't get me wrong, big data helps to organize complex and complicated life. Big data makes the contact to customers, especially in the banking and financial industry, more precise. Before we talk about all this, and I would like to invite you to give your comments about this topic just as well when we open up the floor later on for our discussion, let's hear some insights from Dirk Ettlinger. He is Vice President DACH and Central Eastern Europe from Applied Predictive Technology, which is a Mastercard company. Dirk, floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. How are you? Actually, it's not that early anymore, is it? Right? Come on. Close to 9:30. Yeah, that might be true. That might be true. Alrighty. So I don't know, can we pull up the presentation? Here we go. So making data make money, right? I think you've been at a couple of conferences, right? So whenever you're going to go to a conference, there are a couple of, hot topics, right? One is big data. The other topic is, the sexy thing, which is called regulation in PSD2. Today, I would rather like to focus on the big data topic and less on the regulation part. So I went to a conference a couple of weeks ago. There was a guy, was a presenter, he made a funny comment around big data, and he said, look, everyone is talking about big data, right? But actually nobody really knows how to do it, and everyone thinks everyone else is doing big data, so you as a company, you're going to pretend to do big data as well, right? And I think that's a bit exactly straight to the point, and I've taken this picture here, which I think it's a kind of a good illustration how companies try to deal with new things, right? If you're going to look at this baseball match and there's this baseball approaching you, it's a bit like with every kind of new technology, right? What's your strategy? What are you doing, right? Do you hide and seek? Do you duck and cover? Do you sit and do nothing? Are you trying to escape and hope that the ball hits the other ones? Or are there a couple of people like this nice lady over there, or the guy on the left-hand side, where we are trying to be proactive and trying to get the arms around these things? And it's a bit like what big data at the end is about. And as I said, I think I'm not going to tell you anything new that, of course, the financial service industry, the same as any other industry, today is facing a couple of challenges, right? I talked about regulation, and apart from regulation, there's new technology coming up. There are FinTechs trying to grab a bite or to take a bite of your existing business model and your customer base. These are all challenges, and I think you're well aware of this one. But all of these challenges, first of all, to a certain extent, they do come with new data, right? So that especially new technologies and new innovations, they're going to generate a lot of data. On the other side, the way we do see that at APT, right, by nature, given that we are a data company since almost 20 years, for us, data is a key asset, right? Coming back to the question, is data a challenge or is it a financial asset? For us, it's a clear financial asset, but there are a couple of fundamental principles, right, you need to take into account. And I want to quickly walk you through the main ones, at least the ones as we do see them. And the first one, right, is, it sounds quite obvious, but if you want to start diving into the big data world as a financial institution, right, really ask your question, what kind of data do I have, and really try to seek for the right data. Because today, what you need to keep in mind is storing data is not a big issue anymore, right? And I think most of you know that 90% of all the data worldwide has been generated in the last 2 years. So today, generating data is not the issue. Storing data is not the issue, right? But you need to ask yourself, what data is really meaningful from an economic point of view, right? So for instance, storing and processing and analyzing your complete T-log, your transaction data, not a big issue anymore today, right? Even if you're gonna look at the largest banks worldwide, if you look at the largest retailer, not a big issue anymore, right? Analyzing your entire customer loyalty base from a processing perspective, not a big issue, right? Looking at the entire customer journey, right? What kind of channels customers are tapping into, whether this is mobile, online, whether this is basically walking into the branch, analyzing that, not a big issue anymore. So that's really, what we typically do call actionable big data, or our founders, they call this funny name like kind of big data, right? That's really one of the key focuses you should look at the end. And all the other things, right? Most of those data feeds are so-called unstructured data, right? So for instance, full motion videos of your branches, right? If you're gonna try to analyze, all your call center scripts, for instance, website click streams, to a certain extent, it's really unstructured data. So they generate a lot of volume, but at the end, really super difficult from an economic point of view, right, to analyze these data sets at the end. And once, right, you're gonna have a clue and an idea what types of data you have inside your company, and basically what the business issues are, because sometimes people gonna ask us, look, we do need to have a big data strategy in place. I was gonna ask him, look, what are the kind of business issues and business questions you try to resolve or try to get answered, right, before you're gonna start building a big data strategy. You need to basically be clear about, what's the appropriate analytical approach. And what I want to show you today is kind of really simple and pretty straightforward framework, right? At the end, for us, there are 2 dimensions, right? It's about diagnosing, right, which means understanding the situation, identifying an issue, right, within your company, and the other part is prescription, right? So, which means once you did understand what the issue is, what the challenge is, what are you supposed to do, right? And smart data solutions basically can cater both, right? Diagnosis as well as prescription. And I'm going to give you a pretty simple example, right? If the diagnosis as such is super easy and prescription as well, you don't need that much of big data or something like this, right? So if you as a customer, right, you're going to go on Google, you're going to type in a financial product like mortgage, right? The only thing you need to do is you need to have a system in place, right, which captures the data, and then it's pretty straightforward what you're supposed to do, right? You're going to try to reach out to these customers. On the other side, right, there are situations where diagnosing the issue, right, identifying what the challenge and the issue is, can be really, really difficult at the end, right? And that's, for instance, an area where I think that's the other buzzword, artificial intelligence and machine learning comes into play, right? Mining through tons of data, right, to identify patterns and correlations within that data sets, right? That's the great power of artificial intelligence. And the classic example, and that's something, for instance, Mastercard is using as well, is fraud detection, right? Because you're going to mine through millions and billions of transactions to find patterns which basically do correlate with fraudulent transactions. So here, right, diagnosis is hard and tough, but at the end of the day, the action which follows is pretty simple, right? If there's a fraudulent transaction, basically you're going to block it, right? You're not going to authorize it. The big challenge, though, is, right, you're going to face many situations where diagnosing the issue is either easier, it's either difficult, right? But at the end, the big challenge for you is, what's the action I should put into place, right? What's the approach I should take? And that's where machine learning doesn't help you, right? Because machine learning, it's mostly about finding correlations, but not about, basically identifying causalities at the end. So here you need to have another approach in place, right? Which we basically call it experimentation, right? If you don't know what you're supposed to do, and sometimes it's really hard to accept that you don't know what to do, then you need to experiment, right? You need to test things with the help of analytics, right? With the help of predictive tools, right? And I'll give you a couple of examples. For instance, you'd have a customer, right, and his, checking balances, increase a lot, right, in a couple of days. So what are you supposed to do? So is the private banker picking up the telephone, calling these guys? Might be a good idea, but might be not, because they're going to think, oh, oops, my banker is trying to oversell. Or for instance, if you look at your credit card portfolio, you're going to see, one of your high net worth value customers, their spend is dropping. What are you supposed to do, right? Should you call them up? Should you basically drop them an email? Should you do nothing? So these are situations, right, where market experiments can really, really help you at the end. And so typically, right, when you're going to talk to companies, it's about both, right? Having the right analytical tool sets in place to run diagnosis and having the right tool sets in place really to help about, knowing exactly what to do and how to do it. And once you're going to get to that stage, another obvious thing is, the right organizational structure. It sounds pretty simple, right? Of course, you need to have an organizational culture in place to support analytics, but what you need to keep in mind is that most often requires, change management, a change in behavior, right? Because if you're going to start to incorporate data into your daily decision making, it also means, right, you need to change yourself, right? I need to change processes maybe to a certain extent, and that needs to be driven by senior management, right, by leadership at the end. So it's to a certain extent a cultural change. And of course, the second obvious thing is you need to build your analytical skills. And the interesting part is 50% of the companies we're talking to, they're going to tell us that's what they're really lacking to a certain extent, right? Having those capabilities to analyze data and to interpret those data, it's a big thing. And the third one, not just trying to focus on some key functions where you're going to deploy analytics, right? For instance, finance could be a prominent example, but also, right, really try to spread it across the organization, right? Apart from finance, marketing is a good example, pricing is a good example, and so on. And I would say last but not least, right, data is super important, but there's still this kind of human factor, right? You still do have a brain, right? You still do have, common sense. And the thing is, you just need to apply it to a certain extent. Here's an example, right? I talked about machine learning. And if you're going to see, right, that what shows you, right, the yellow line, that's basically the number of people who basically, fell into a pool and died, right? And it highly correlates with, the number of movies Nicolas Cage was acting in. And now you can debate, right, whether Nicolas Cage has made some really bad movies. That might be true. So from a pure analytics perspective, there's a super high correlation. But if you're going to use your brain, right, you know that this is nonsense. So I think there's one key message. Data is really important, but you also need to use your brain. Thank you very much.
Knowing what to do and how to do it. I think that was one of the key messages. So we'll talk about that. You stay on stage. I welcome my other panelists. Laura Wirtz, Head of Strategy, ING. Markus Gunter, CEO, N26 Bank. And Thomas Grosse, Industry Leader, Banking and FinTech from Google Germany. Welcome.
Morgen, hallo.
So let's start out with the first question, just to give us an idea of what your opinion is about data, just with a wish for a really short answer that we have kind of a feeling of where you stand. Do we still own the control of our data, Thomas?
It's you asked for a short answer, so I say partly. We can discuss it later what it means.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say as a company, yes. As individuals, no.
Mm-hmm. Laura?
Yeah, I tend to agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think sometimes you're going to get the feeling that as an end consumer, you're not going to have control over your data, but I think sometimes also about how you're going to behave, right? And if you're going to go to the Googles and the Facebooks of this world, I think you still do have control of your data.
Okay, so that's pretty optimistic. So let's talk about this. For all your companies, I would like to get an idea, where do the data, and you mentioned that already in your speech before, where do the data come from you work with? So what is about the quality, quantity, what kind of data do you generate and what do you use? Where does it come from? Thomas.
So you're asking Google, so it's actually a quite complex answer as well. Obviously, our mission, as you know, is to organize the world's information and make it accessible to all users. So the data sources are pretty much everywhere, right? So if you take like our core product, Google Search, which is based on like millions of different data pools, so kind of, you know, intelligently get them together and get meaningful information when you ask a query question. So the data pools, at least for Google, is very, very, very wide. Yeah.
But how do you control the quality of data, especially when you use like all sort of data there is in the world? I mean, especially with Google, as you said, it's tons of it.
Well, I mean, the question is also what does quality of data mean, right? So I would say in the context of search, it's a lot about, does it answer your questions, right? So and actually you want to have a certain diversity as well. You don't want like you know, the danger is a little bit with data that you get bias into it, right? So that you get actually the data you kind of looked before, and if it's too much bias, you want to have a pretty objective criteria to kind of show what the data is actually relevant, and so you kind of you have to make sure that.
Talk to me. Other side? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah. So coming to an end to your question. So it's actually it's a complex answer, and you have to really make sure that you have, for example, machine learning to help you in achieve objectivity with data as well.
For banks, what kind of data do you use? I mean, obviously you can't use every data there is in the world, hopefully anyway. So where do you get your data from?
Well, we mainly get our data, of course, from our clients themselves. I mean, this is what they do with us, how they interact with us, what we see them doing actually also. And there was the example of the website and these kind of things. Of course, we track that. But of course, we also look into different data sources, and that's not something new. We've always done that as banks. So we've also looked at joint data that we share with other banks, of course. So there are various choices. And I think it's very relevant what you said is the question you need to ask yourself always is what you want to have the data for, what is it supposed to be, and is the quality right quality? Because you can have tons and tons of data, but the question is, does it really serve the need?
And do you have quality control with your data? Is there a certain door data have to go through where they get checked and where it gets beep when something is wrong?
Well, I think if you talk about data, this is a very broad like type of word. So we have to differentiate. I think there's a lot of data that is very pure and also totally uncompromised. That also comes probably directly from the customer, probably from his passport. So from, if you want, from the state, more or less, from a state-approved situation. Then other data comes very clear and also uncompromised, probably from partners like Mastercard. If you talk about transaction data, if you talk about information on what does the customer do at a certain stage. And there's other data that where you have the necessity to kind of check it in a way, if we talk about fraud detection, etc. So there's a lot of data out there, and there's different categories, and so basically almost everything is true that you could say about it. I think it is very important to be very clear about where do you get the data from. Is the customer like okay with it? Did you check in with the customer on using his data for a certain action or solution probably that you want to offer? And also obviously you touched upon it. There's a lot of anonymized data that we also use to learn to make better offers, to search for customers that are probably fitting to our brand positioning, etc. So.
To get an idea of the, when I first talked about the data, you said it, the universe, it's big, and there's of course not one data, but there is so much potential data out there. You probably, you can't, of course, count it. How much of this potential data, which is out there, is actually used? Is that a number you could predict? So, as I said, there's like 100% out there, and right now we only use 10% because we are only able to use 10%, and we would like to do more, but we need maybe more sort of artificial intelligence or anything. Is that?
It's a quite tricky question, right? Because it depends, right? That's always a good start if you try to answer the question. But the thing is, right, because if you look at the pure volume of data, then most of it is basically unstructured data, right? And that's the key. That's really difficult to analyze that from an economic point of view, as I've mentioned. But there are various statistics outside of the market, and it does vary by industry, right? I heard. Honestly, I have no clue how they're going to measure it, but I heard, numbers where maybe we're gonna use a third of all the data which is outside really to run analytics on that kind of data. So it really varies by industry, but honestly, I think quoting on a precise number, for me, I think it's...
Yeah, of course, not a precise number, but
it's a third in my point of view.
That's quite a lot. I would have estimated it would be lower than that. What's your measurement on that? How much of the...
I guess it's a bit lower if you really look at data as such, and like we've seen the video example, I would say it's not a third that we use.
And would you like to use more? Would banking be easier if you could use more data which is out there, or are you pretty fine with what we have right now?
That's a good question. Well, actually, I would be happy to use more data if I see the value of it. So yeah, sure, if you ask me, do I want to have more data on my clients? Probably yes. But am I currently able to use it? Not sure. So for me, it's always the question. I can get, like everyone here said, there's a lot of data out there you can get. But the question is, are we able to use it to an extent that it makes sense? And in the end, for me, it's always important. It needs to make sense for the client. So as long as I'm not able to use the data in a way that it brings a benefit for my customer, there is no use for me in using that data.
Yeah.
And of course, you can argue through regulation and GDPR that doesn't obviously make life easier, I guess, for every one of us. But there is a reason why we do have that. So I think the question is just how do we make sure that with the regulation in place, and of course with adhering to the regulation, we still can use the data that we do already have for the benefit of the client.
I always wonder, is there first the idea of a product, and then you look for the data and the demand there is out there, or do you have the data and the demand you might have and then build the product around it? How does that work? And 26, because it kind of adds on to the question before. Could you do more if you would have more data or more information for the clients and the customers?
Well, we definitely start by thinking about the customer's needs, and I can say that without blushing or showing any kind of strange reaction.
But once in a while, the customers don't even know it, right? That they need something. I mean, look at the iPhone. Nobody ever thought they would need an iPhone, and now nobody can do without. Even now, people are on their iPhone.
That's right. But that probably didn't start with data, but with a really great idea of making it very easy for customers to do to do something that he's used to doing very complicated. So that probably also didn't start off with data, but probably with a vision, really, or with the probability to use technology in a way that it makes it really easy to use something. And that's probably also also what we try to do with banking. Make it very easy, make it very intuitive, really thinking about how does the customer use it. That's the first thought that we really have. And then it's about, at a later stage, it's about data and what can you do with it, how can we solve a problem, probably easier if we get more data from the customer, etc.
So there are no ideas already in the closet which could be pulled out if you would have more possibilities when it comes to?
No, I don't think so. The real bottleneck is probably development capacity, really, and not use or access to data at the moment, I would say.
Thomas, for you, the universe is very big. could you do more if you would have better data, more quality of it, better ideas of it? Is that a business case for you at that point?
Well, I think it all was already mentioned a little bit. I think your first question is how much data is actually used, and I would say if you narrow it down and say what's used really for like analytical purposes, like really like in-depth analysis, I think only not a lot of data is used. It's probably below 10% would be my guess. And as we already mentioned before, the amount of data is the numbers I know is doubling every 2 years in the world. So you have like in 10 years you have like 30 times the data. So I don't think for many problems it's not a data problem per se that the data is not there. I think it's more the direction of having a good use case, right? So and this is something Google always strive for. We are really looking for what is a good use case for users, for end users, and then try to figure out how data can actually help solve that problem. Now, it's obviously not such clear cut because obviously if you don't know what you can do with data, you're going to have an interaction. So I think what works very well is you have to have very diverse teams, like a real business owner understands what users want, users themselves, and you need data specialists, and they have to kind of get together. It's a creative process to come out of a solution. I think this is. There's no clear-cut process about it, so you have to kind of be also a little bit creative overall.
Just would like to remind you that we open the floor later on for your questions, so prepare for it when it's time for it. Since we are at a banking conference, I would like to get more into detail of what you use the data for. What kind of data exactly in detail do you use to build your product? Is that just female, male, age, where somebody lives, what somebody shops in at Amazon, what money inflow they have? You have maybe, or you sure have for data from the incomes from the people. What are the actual data you both use for your companies to build the products on?
Now again, this is very different in all categories. You may want to produce a very sophisticated credit product, like a consumer credit, a very innovative solution on the overdraft side, which probably takes into account more than just the Schufa scoring or something. Then you tend to anonymize data, get big chunks of data, and try to make some sense out of it.
But how does that work?
So
you said it comes from the customer. So there's a demand for, let's say, a credit product.
Yeah.
You see that. So how is the working process then? You go to your developers and say, okay, we need this product, and I need from you 1, 2, 3. What is like? How does that go? This working
basically,
process?
it's about two big areas. One is all the interaction with the customer, where you talk about customer experience, making it super easy, making sure that data gets reduced to the max, in a sense of that it also goes quickly, because time is also very important for us and the customer. We don't want to have him fill out lists by 10 or 15 minutes, because we know not a lot of people will do that. And so we have a lot of data, but probably no customer anymore. So it's about the interaction with the customer on the one side, and then it's about the, if you want to call it back-end or whatever, probably a scoring model that is behind it. And here you need probably totally different data. You're not talking only about an individual customer's data, but you need like big chunks of data, in a sense of that you can follow patterns, that you can define certain categories of customers, that you can find out how to react, like we saw before at Dirk's presentation. How do I react to a certain action from a customer, spending more or less, getting into trouble in his account, etc.? How do you react? So it's really it's a very broad journey we're talking about. If you take a look at it from the customer's view until the border to the back office, and then again within the bank, and also probably within partners like Schufa or whoever, other banks probably, where you again have a big journey to cover. So it's not easy to answer these questions.
How does it work in ING? There's an idea for a product, and then
And then I go to our data analyst. No, I indeed do that quite often, just because it is, you mentioned that already also, it's a creative process. It's, we do have ideas around certain client needs that we get from client feedback or these things. And then there's always, you can take it the traditional way, or you can sit with those colleagues that are working on these things day to day and get ideas what they think could be possible with what they're already working on or the ideas they have. And that comes from, like what you rightfully said, it's very valid for any credit product or these kind of things, but there are of course more use cases than that. And I think the question on data is, and I like to stress what you mentioned also with the question, what kind of data do I ask the client proactively? And I think that's the difference, of course, especially we as a digital bank see, is that, well, if you were in a branch, or if you're in a branch, whether you read or sign one more page, that really probably doesn't matter. But if you need to scroll on your mobile phone, that matters. So the dropout rates are high. So the question for me is always, talking to my colleagues, what kind of data do we really need, and when do I need it to do certain things? And like account opening processes are a nice example for these things, because we tend to ask everything on the first page, and then usually the client drops off as soon as they need to start to scroll. And the question for me there is, which kind of data do I need? And that's coming back to what I said before. What do I need the data for, really, and what is the value? And then if I have an idea on, okay, I can make that easier, then you either talk to the colleagues that are more from the legal side and say, okay, what can I do now, what can I do later, and ask the client for it. But then also on the creative process, it's indeed a close contact with our data analysts and the people that really have a good feeling on data, and I have to say very creative usually.
I would like to add one thing. Basically, we're talking a lot about data, but interestingly enough, in our development process, it is very early on about human reaction. Like if you have a very short, we used to probably develop a product like working 3 months on it and then putting it to the market, kind of. Nowadays, we tend to have very quick sprints, like probably 2-week sprint. And then we have a product, that we have something that you can show to a customer. And then very early on, we invite customers in and let them fumble around with it, like let them check it. Then again, and that's a very basic human reaction. It's not so much about data. Then probably we make data out of it in the sense, okay, we watch these people, how they react, where do they look? We watch their eyes, do they go left or right, etc. Do they like to swipe or to go up and down, whatever kind of reaction. But very early on, it's not so much about data. It's how does the customer interact with this product? Does it work for him? Because again, with all the data and all the like the technique, if you want, it doesn't make any sense if nobody uses it in the end. So we are very keen to find out how the people react to a product in a very early stage, and this is not so much about data.
I always wonder how companies, I mean, the data are the same all over the world. They are all the same. And how can companies actually compete to each other with a whole pool of data, the same customers, same data, same demands? How can they actually do things differently? Is that then, in the end, again, just the product they build on the basis of data? How in this world of digitalization? I mean, what is your competition there? What's your advantages?
I think in the end, the product itself, if you look at a banking product and you look at the basic products, the core product itself is not the thing that will differentiate me. I mean, a payment account is a payment account.
Yeah.
The difference it makes is if I am smart in what you just mentioned, Markus, on how I interact with the client. I think this is where it comes in. How good am I in anticipating my client needs? And this is where the data comes in then. But also in how convenient can I make things. I mean, we've just had a talk before in the round here on how our kids react to convenience. So if I look at my kids, and they're 12, 10, and 8, and I look at them how they look for convenient things, they're totally not up to waiting for things. For example, for them on demand, it's natural. They're really used to that. If I would now tell them that you can have all of this in the world, but if you go to a bank and we talk about financing, and I mean, to be honest, we all know banking is not the most fun thing. Then in the end, the question for me is, how do I still stay relevant for my client? And how do I make sure that the experiences that they know, be it from Google, Amazon, whoever, that they have a similar experience with me as a bank? And that is quite a challenge, because I think for banks, that's a different way of thinking. We were coming a lot from the product side, like you rightfully said. So we're trying to distinguish ourselves about the products more. I think now it's really about the customer experience. And this is where I see most of the use cases for data.
I always wonder if it's not only about the convenience. I think you're very right on that. But if it's all comes down to the question of trust. And
Sure.
if you are a trusted company, if that what really makes a difference. Google, safety of data, and trust. How does that go together?
It's super important. Obviously, as you all know, pretty much all the Google products are to some extent database. So, and having like consent from users, and they know exactly what is being done with the data, is quite important. And I don't think we have done it always right in the past, but we have invested a lot. You probably all use Google products, I'm assuming. You know the data policy. You can go into your account. You know, okay, how is your data used? You can say what it should be used or not. So, so being really transparent and have users know how the data is used is so important. Also, when we maybe later on talk about how this is going to go, right? So there's going to be more data products. If we lose the end users, we lose society in the use of data. We all have a problem, right? All the companies, Google and banks, which work with data as well, we have a serious problem overall.
Point of trust, Dirk. What is
I think that's it's a really important point, you know, because if you look at the business model of Mastercard, right? What's the business model of Mastercard is processing transactions, right? And just to give you a flavor. So we do process roughly 160, 180 million transactions an hour, right? It's a really large number, and our data warehouse is pretty large as well. So security and trust, I think that's part of our DNA at the end, right? To a certain extent, our business model, of course, is different, right? Because we do operate in a B2B environment, right? But at the end, it's about, right, connecting more than 22,000 banks like ING, like N26, with close to 40 million merchant locations. And for us, that's our DNA, that's our core business model, right? And if you basically at the end, if you're not going to make sure that the data is safe and that the data is secure.
And how do you provide that?
There are many things, right? It's about physical elements, the same like if you're gonna operate a typical data warehouse like Google does, right? Like I guess maybe you do as well. The physical security measures which are being kept in place, right? But you're gonna, and I think I'm not gonna elaborate to that one. And that's the main part. And there are also process-related measurements we're gonna put in place in order to make sure, and of course, IT and software-related measurements in place. Give you a flavor, right? Also our Mastercard network, of course, people are gonna try to hack that, but then that never has happened so far, right? Because if that's going to happen, we are out of business.
But I mean, we all followed the case of Facebook and the data which got out of hand. How can you, secure that things like that don't happen? How does it work? Because I think really safety, trust is the key element of all this. How do you secure that?
I mean, that's maybe talking about benefits of being a bank. We've always had to do that. There was, I mean, and that's the trust factor, I think, that you rightfully mentioned is, if you want to see that as a competitive advantage, yes, maybe. Because we were always forced to make sure that all the data that we do have is not shared with anyone. So that is something that's really deep in the DNA of us. But I agree that, of course, with all the new technologies and people really focusing on data much more than they were before, that you need to take different measures. But to be honest, I mean, if you look at the human factor in it, and you have people taking CDs out of your bank, I mean, that's something you need to take into consideration. So fraud has always been there. I think we just need to make sure that we're very well aware of what we're doing there and also how to secure our data. And I think the knowledge about these kind of things has grown, unfortunately, on both sides. So it's always a question of how can we be a step ahead of those that try to get into the data and tap it.
Markus, does the safety aspect keep you awake at night? Is that something, a danger comes up and gets even more because we don't live on an island, right? I mean, and there is, you can't have 100% protection, I guess. That you're most concerned?
You should have somewhere around or close to 100% protection. That's basically what we're all searching for. Does it keep me awake at night? No, but because I think if you follow regulation, you have gone a very long way. We have very strict regulations in European banking, also in data security, etc. So if you 100% follow these instructions, these regulations, then you've already made a very good job. Then you can add some creativity to it. For example, we have a bug bounty program, so motivating people to hack us, and also giving them money if they kind of found something that could be improved, and many other ways of adding, like probably creativity, analytics. We talked a lot about data analytics, also about AI, probably. So you can do a lot additionally, but in the end, I totally agree. It has to be the DNA of a bank, of somebody who is trusted with customers' data. More than in any other industry. That's super important for us.
Maybe it's funny that I ask you, Thomas, about more regulation, since Google is always, we think, crawling for always more information they can get. But would you think more regulation would help, maybe, to protect against fraud and all these things which come in from outside this place, outside Germany, outside Europe, with all this coming around? Would more regulation help?
Well, I'm not sure.
We have a lot of regulation.
I know.
I think we actually do. And we have probably the most regulation in the European Union versus like the US or other markets we work in. I don't know if it's necessary regulation, but we have to have a deep discussion how society wants data to be used, what our meanings of transparency. So there has to be an open discussion about does it have to end up in regulation all the time? I don't know. I mean, regulation sometimes also hinders innovation, so that's always like a balancing act, I guess. But maybe coming back to the data security topic, my view is, I mean, obviously Google has the same issues. If we would have a data breach and we invest like a lot of money in making sure on a hardware level, even our data centers, that data is secure. But I think the bigger danger is actually the end user, because I mean, when I look at myself, I probably have 100 passwords somewhere, right? I mean, email account.
I only use one. That works.
That makes it. You know what I'm saying, right? So the danger is much more, because then you're getting tired, and then you have capital letters there, then you have to use numbers, and so how do you manage your own passport portfolio? Yeah. And I think the danger of data breach is much more on this side. I think like banks or Google, I mean, we have so many resources in making sure, but I think the breach is. The danger of breaches on the customer side. How do you actually educate people to, or even maybe have a technical good solution to make it more secure, right? I haven't seen it yet, so.
Yeah, definitely.
So the human factor is the biggest problem, I guess.
I think so, yeah.
Right. So, but how can you educate people? How can you, go against that this is like the weakest link?
It's very easy sometimes. I mean, you mentioned it. Sometimes it's just about educating people about not using the same password for their banking application and for their, I don't know, a Gmail account or whatever. That's very simple. But a lot of people do it. So it's very easy to compromise their data in the end if you're targeting this.
I think it starts early. Yeah, also there we had the discussion on how do I educate kids or whoever on using data in the internet. What is that like? If I had the example of my daughter getting an Instagram account, which I personally didn't. She's 12, so I didn't like that. And she was pretty happy telling me, "Mommy, I registered and I didn't use my email address." So it's like, so what did you use? I just used my phone number. And you're like, and then not even understanding that certain things you put in there are not safe, because for her it's on her phone. She has the idea if it's in my phone, it's secured somehow there, it's safe. So it starts, I think, pretty early, and we had the discussion earlier also on where does I mean, does school take the lead in educating people? Because this is where you would usually think you get an understanding of how society works, what do I do, what do I not do? And data and the how do I take care of my own personal data, that is not usually part of education.
But is it a sort of a trade-off? We had that earlier between convenience and safety. Is that the balance you have to look for?
I'm not sure what I would say is convenience and safety. It's for sure convenience and data. So I need to be, I think the question for me always is, do I want to give that data, or do I think that what I get back for the data is worth giving the data, but that implies that I understand what I do. So I really need to be aware of that things usually are not for free. So if I just want to have some more, I don't know, services or something, and I'm supposed to give data, usually it comes with a cost, and it's usually not a directly visible cost.
Yeah, but that comes kind of back to the question: if we have more devices or other systems or ideas on the horizon to make things more convenient, but to have them safer. I was yesterday here at a session where it came to this Mastercard secure code thing, where you have to dial in so many numbers, and I know that from my own experience. Forget it, when I don't know where is this thing, and I don't, So and then it's super safe, but it's not convenient. So do we need more, ideas how to get it more convenient? I don't know. Is voice a point? I always hear that this is like the next dimension. Commands. Is that the next thing in banking?
Well, we do already have it in the Netherlands in our app, so it's there, it works. For me, it's always the question, is it really convenient for my client? So what we know from our client feedback is they don't feel that, where do you use your mobile phone when you want to do a banking transaction? If I sit in the tram here, I maybe don't want to do that by my voice on the phone. It's as simple as that. So,
or you shouldn't.
Or I shouldn't, But I think this is always the question. I mean, it's there. I think it's having secure things in the right surroundings. So security also has to do some with where I am and what am I doing, what's my surrounding.
What do you think? Any comments or questions for our panelists here? We have microphones. Do we see anything? Does anybody have a question? Yes, here, first row. Maybe you introduce yourself so that we just know your name. And
Ram Shaw, I'm from Accelerator Frankfurt. I work a lot with data, big data analytics and so forth. But having all of you there, I'd actually be very interested in hearing your perspectives on open source data, Google, Apple, social media. What happens if Google opens a bank, Apple opens a bank? How do you compete against that? Because my bank will never give me a loan if they see my bank account, but Google will certainly give me a loan because they probably know me much better than the bank. So I'd be very interested in hearing your perspective on that.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Who would like to answer that?
Was that a question for the banks or for Google?
Probably both.
Did you ask him if he knows about banking, if he could do it, or did you ask us if we could stand?
Both.
No, basically, I'm just joking. Obviously, with Google and probably also with other companies like Amazon, etc., we are definitely in kind of a frenemy position. On the one hand, we have corporations, we need and like each other a lot, and work together to probably have better products also for the customer, to integrate certain ideas, etc. Also to reach out to customers, obviously, to get new customers. So there's a lot of cooperation on the one hand. On the other side, basically, Google, Amazon, all those guys, Apple, probably, they could do everything. So you could ask these questions in every industry in the world. You could ask them in the car industry, do you fear Google? Probably yes. Or Apple, probably surely yes. Do I fear Google? No, and Apple no, because I think we are doing a very good job, and it's a big world outside, and I don't fear them doing banking business because I know how complex it is. I know how much you have to know about regulation. I'm not sure if people at Google really want to spend a lot of time with these kinds of additional regulations, having then a business that is probably not so strong in margin, etc. So it's a very complex business. I think there's room for everybody. If you're really good, and I think we can do it very, very good, then we will be there. Probably Google will someday do banking. I don't know. It's going to be their decision. I don't care.
Thomas, is there a Google Bank pretty soon? That would be a good
I don't think
announcement
so.
for this day.
I'm going to check on my smartphone later on and see if you get a loan from us. Now, coming back to it, obviously we don't have a banking license, and which was already mentioned, we choose to partner with banks. So I think Google Pay, which is pretty much the only banking product we offer, but it's not we offer it alone. We work closely with Mastercard in offering the service. And 26 was a launching partner with us here in Germany. So we know what to do and what not to do, and we know we can do a good user interface on the smartphone, maybe collect data from Google Maps, integrate it into payment information and so on. But we also know what banks can do and what card processors can do. So we see it. We think it's going to interact with different devices and technical options, but we opt not to be a bank ourselves.
Could be just a matter of time, though, right?
You know what? In 10 years, who
whatever.
knows, right?
Yeah, of course. Any more questions from the audience? Comments? Somebody would like to ask a question? Nobody? Okay. Well, I ask later on too, so don't be afraid. If everybody talks about platforms these days, everybody wants to be a platform, and it's, in every industry, I think now the platform is the big thing. So if this is the right idea to be a platform, how will that work with all the data? I mean, if ING or N26 has its platform, and then I put others on my platform because I understand I want to be close to the customer, so I don't care if they do the business with me, I just want to have them on my platform. How will that work? Safety aspects, fraud aspects, data aspects, how will that work? Or is that even the strategy?
The strategy on platform, you
Yeah.
mean? I mean, yeah, of course. I think we've said it a couple of times.
Yeah.
Alzheimer's has put
Yeah.
it very prominently.
Yeah.
That's the idea. I'm always just a bit smiling because my question is always, what is a platform?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm always struggling with getting a question on, so what's your platform strategy? And compare that to others. I agree, though, that if you think platform in the sense of having a place to go for the client where he can find more than only my banking products, then I do agree, yes, I think that is, and that's rightfully what you said, that will be the case for every industry, more or less, I think. Partnering with others, also, that is nothing new. We do already partner with others. And we do have things like, we've just announced the AXA cooperation. That's also partnering with others. That's, I mean, you just need to make sure that in the way you partner, you're very clear on who owns the client data, but that is also something that we are used to. That's nothing new. We do have different partners that we
But isn't that really the good question? Who owns the client anyway? Who owns the client?
Depends on how you negotiate it. No, honestly, I mean that this is part of negotiating in partnerships, of course. So this is a valid question, and that's why I think being a whatever sort of platform, in the sense of that I still have the client interface, for me is the most important part. So if I'm not the one who has the client interface anymore, so if I'm not able to speak to my client in what way ever, then I would argue I get a problem, at least as a bank, because my bank, what I do, my business is basically I'm a service provider for my client with products in the back, yes, but I'm providing financial services in the end. So I always tend to say, well, I want to own my client, but there could be cases where I'm willing to say I'm a provider of something, and that could be white labeling solutions, for example. But in the end, for me, the question is more, I can own the client, but if I have 5 clients, it's nice to own them. So if what do I do with this? If in the end the question is not so much about owning, but about cooperation and sharing, and just making sure that we still serve the client, and hopefully that's under an ING name or an ING brand, then owning the client can be something different.
Dirk, when we look at those platforms, and you just mentioned it, all other different sorts of financial aspects coming in when you mention EXA or even other things, do data gets out of hand then in the end? Because when we look at insurances, when we maybe look at shopping things, all on the banking banking platform, is that going out of hand in the end?
I guess that's rather a question for ING and N26 because look, what kind of data do we basically pull, right? If you're going to work with banks, it's transaction data, for instance, it's credit card data, right? Which you basically can. We're going to access our data warehouses, CRM data, and things like these. So basically, all the data banks collect, that's the data which they're basically going to transfer over to us to run the analysis as such, right? So I think that's rather a question. So at the end, we do not control, right, what the banks are doing with this data, where it comes from, right? So at the end, it's rather a question, I would say, for.
I don't see so much of a difference to good old branch business. I mean, you walked into a Sparkasse, then they gave you a DK-Fonds, which is a problem, as we know. So and then they gave you a Sparkassenversicherung, and then gave you that and that, and so you
but
weren't
we learned our lesson that was not very good, maybe.
Yes, I'm not talking about that's why it was just half a sentence. I'm not talking about the effects of proprietary products being put on a client that doesn't need it or doesn't need other products. But what we're really talking about is, do I have different connections to different companies? That yes, you have a DK connection, yes, you have a Sparkassenversicherung connection, and so on. So it's nothing different. We just take away all the footwork to the branch. That's what we're doing. It's nothing different. And probably in terms of, and then yes, it gets into the point of what is the best product. Do I always have to sell proprietary products, or do I have an open kind of sourcing? What we do is being very agnostic about, is it our product or is it somebody else's product, as long as it's good for the client, and we also earn something with it. We don't have to do everything ourselves. We know that certain things we cannot do at the moment, probably because of bottlenecks. Certain things we cannot do because we're not clever enough in a certain area, because we're concentrated on other things where we are very, very good, and also probably Google cannot so easily copy us, etc., etc. So we don't care about our balance sheet so much. We care about what does the customer need, and can we earn some money with it, so everybody's happy in the end. It doesn't need to be on our balance sheet.
Questions coming up? Here we go. Get a microphone.
I'm Frank from CFS China. I have a question about GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. Under these new rules, how will it affect the big data and data mining? Thank you.
Who would like to take that?
Well, one thing is, I think it is very positive, especially for our business model. It is very positive if we have standardization, also European standardization, probably even global, but it would be a good case if it would even be a lot of things would be standardized in Europe. So even if it is regulation, I think it helps a lot. It makes things complex. That's the second part of the question. Definitely, it is very complex and absolutely challenging to implement GDPR in every in every aspect of your business, in every micro service, in every client's data, etc. That is super complex, and I think everybody is struggling with meeting it 100%. On the other hand, I mean, it's a clear law. We have quite a good track record as banks in Germany following the law, so we have to do it. And I'm sure also it brings some security to clients, but as you know, because as you know, we did a talk about trust, and it makes definitely sure that everybody has a level playing field, also competitors, also other businesses, and that the customer knows where his data is at a certain stage. He can also have transparency at any stage. He has the right to delete data in very complicated and different aspects of his business relationship with a bank or with another partner. So I think it is very important, but it is also very complex, absolutely.
Any more questions? Yeah, back there.
Hello, I have a question for Google. What is the idea, or what is the argument against banks, or to compare to work together with Google if it comes to payments? So, what is the sales argument? So, let's say it in that way.
You mean for Google Pay?
Yeah, for Google Pay
yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think if it's especially well integrated into our Android operating system, and we can actually enrich it with data we have from the users ourselves, like location data from Google Maps and so on. So we can actually enrich this with the transaction data from banks, and you have a good user experience. I think this is one thing, and we can probably also make sure that you have a higher user adoption, right? I think we have seen a lot of cases in Germany where banks try to enter mobile payment as well, and I don't know any success case really just by doing it like in a small, in a smaller version, because it's just the adoption is not there. And so I think having a partner with a lot of user base, the option to make the experience even worthwhile beyond the payment itself is probably the value added, I would say.
I think it was a good talk. Thank you very much for it. Trust is the key element. I'm glad that we all agree on that here on the panel. We have some data passing on, because I steal one of your quotes you had earlier. Data is not everything. You still need brain. I pretty much like that. Thank you very much for all your insights and the discussion about it. And thank you. And I guess we have now a coffee break.